To my melanated family and spiritually conscious brothers and sisters around the world, I am Brother Tommy. It's time to get it in. One love, family. Today we are going to talk about reparations. And we're not going to talk about reparations from an issue of whether they should pay it or not, because the debt is definitely owed. They may try their very best to act as if it is not, have all this issue of confusion of when the immigrants came, before the immigrants got here, after they got here, who's owed, who's not. All those other issues that they try to bring up are just talking points for the European or white supremacists. The bottom line is the debt is owed. But my issue, family, is having a discussion about what we should be asking for. Because the majority of time when we find ourselves in these situations, we always have people speaking on our behalf that do not represent us. So we as a melanated family really need to look this issue closely and say, okay, we do recognize that there is a debt owed, but how should that debt be paid is the biggest question, because technology is huge in this day and time. And if you receive something or some benefit from a government, or if it's styled a certain way or pinned a certain way, you got a serious problem on your hand. So we agree that the debt is owed. What should we be asking for? Gold, land, other precious metals. If we do get a land allotment, how will we own that land? In what status? And what status should we own that land? Would the land be taxable? Can they tax it back from us if there's delinquent taxes? So these are the type of questions that we need to ask and we need to answer. Do we want to accept the American dollar? Is the American dollar efficient? You know, like I know, they print it out of the thin air, debits and credits in a system, and it has the ability to crash because it is a fiat currency that's not any longer pegged to any particular asset or precious metal. So what would we be looking like if we were willing to accept monetary payments in the form of cash when the dollar itself can collapse, when the whites suppress themselves the dollar, when the dollar itself is an evidence of debt? And we got a lot of people talking about wanting cash payments. So this isn't to bash any brother that wants to run up and to the closest Cadillac dealer and purchase them a Cadillac. Well, we know that's going to happen, but we also know there's a lot of conscious brothers and sisters. If they did get monetary payments, they would do something with it, like attempt to turn it into assets. But, somebody can give you something one day and turn it into nothing overnight. And one thing that we're going to look at in this video is there's a new era coming, that the dollar isn't what you think it is. It's a debt note that's been enslaving the world. And we need to really, really get into whether we should be willing to even accept this as a part of the reparations debt that is owed. So what we're going to do is take it slow, family, go from the beginning to where we're at now, how this particular monetary world order come into place that we're dealing with. And plus, on top of that, I'm sorry, let me go back a second. Let's say they do give us some cash. We know that they have the ability to stop or to freeze, or whatever word that they may choose, any assets you have that is within their system. So asking for reparations for assets or things that are within their system, let's take a look at them and see if that's the proper way to go about it. Because if they control it in their system and you don't, then what do you really have? So let's look at this monetary system that's in place and see why the dollar has been reigning supreme for so long. And secondly, we also need to look at the BRIC nations. Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and South Africa are coming together to join an economic union that rivals and represents a larger percentage of Earth than the current system. And they're looking to erase the United States dollar as the world currency. So if you have these type of geopolitical things at play and these type of things going on with the dollar, at any moment this dollar can basically be sent home back to America with no value. And then here they've given this over to so-called black people for all the horrors of slavery, Jim Crow, and everything else that they've done. And now you're sitting here holding a devaluated dollar in your hand. And then you look to your left and you look at the white supremacist, and he's shaking his shoulders at you like, well, hey, it is what it is. So, family, should we be looking for monetary payment as a form of reparations, considering the status of the dollar and the world monetary system?
New Hampshire, delegates from 44 allied and associate countries arrived for the opening of the United Nations Monetary and Financial Conference. Invited by President Roosevelt to the first major world financial meeting since the London Conference of 1933, they will work in the seclusion of this White Mountains resort. Shi Kung, one of China's representatives, with Secretary and Mrs. Henry Morgenthau. United States Treasury Secretary Morgenthau heads the American delegation. On the opening day, in his role of acting conference president, he addresses the meeting. To be discussed are plans for the stabilization of world currencies. All agreements must be ratified by the governing bodies of the nations involved before becoming effective. Delegates to this monetary and financial conference pose on the hotel lawn. These meetings are designed to promote trade in the post-war world and to create a foundation for lasting peace.
And this is the current world order in which is in effect right now, family. And you have melanated nations fighting against this current monetary system. So in 1944, the Bretton Woods Agreement, which was signed by these nations, was formerly known as the United Nations Monetary Fund and Financial Conference. So their goal was to dominate international monetary and financial order. Out of this conference came the IMF, which is the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the reconstruction fund that they put together to rebuild Europe after the war came out of this agreement as well. At the time, this is 1944, so one thing was to establish an exchange rate, was basically to make the dollar the world currency and peg it to the gold, and then create an exchange rate based off of that gold. Now that's in 1944. We're going to see that pegging the dollar to the gold is something that's been gone a long time ago.
The first question, we must know what the gold standard is. The gold standard is a monetary system where a country's currency has a value directly linked to gold. With the gold standard, countries agreed to convert paper money into a fixed amount of gold. In practice, the central bank agrees to buy and sell gold to anyone at a fixed price. This means that a country cannot print more money without having more gold first. In the conference, among the main goals were as follows: creating an efficient foreign exchange system, preventing competitive devaluations of currencies, and promoting international economic growth. It wasn't until 1958 that the Bretton Woods system became fully functional. Once implemented, its provisions called for the US dollar to be pegged to the value of gold. Moreover, all other currencies in the system were then pegged to the US dollar's value. The exchange rate applied at the time set the price of gold at $35 an ounce. The Bretton Woods system included 44 countries. These countries were brought together to help regulate and promote international trade across borders. As with the benefits of all currency pegging regimes, currency pegs are expected to provide currency stabilization for trade of goods and services, as well as financing. Thanks to Bretton Woods, the US dollar was officially crowned the world's reserve currency and was backed by the world's largest gold reserves. Instead of gold reserves, other countries accumulated reserves of US dollars. The demand for US Treasury securities was high since countries considered them to be a safe way to store their US dollars. This gave the American government an unparalleled ability to borrow money and fund budget deficits.
We must understand that at this time, family, they're not mentioning anything about melanated nations, African nations. These countries that they're bringing together for these agreements, for this world order, white hegemony, is with European countries, European nations. So we have to see the importance of working together, even if you're not in full agreement with everything, but working together as melanated people as a global goal, because you see how it benefited them. This world order that we're now existing in was set up for the benefit of white people, white domination, white imperialism. So when we're bringing reparations to the table and we're discussing reparations, we need to be asking ourselves, is what we're doing cutting this cord, breaking this power dynamic, or is it enabling this power dynamic to continue on? If you give me something that you create out of thin air, I'm staying within the same power paradigm and the power structure that exists, and that ain't gonna do any of us any good. And remember, family, the dollar is pegged to the gold for the gold standard, but knowing who has the gold and how much of it that they have is an important factor. So when it comes to having trust about how much gold they say they have, is there any trust there?
The demand for US Treasury securities was high since countries considered them to be a safe way to store their US dollars. This gave the American government an unparalleled ability to borrow money and fund budget deficits. But even this had its limits. In the 1960s, the US government's finances came under stress due to increased spending on social programs as well as the Vietnam War. This caused the United States to print more dollars to cover the deficit caused by these events. With so many dollars flooding the market and the same amount of gold available, concern grew in the international community. Other countries could not see the US backing up the new amount of dollars with the amount of gold they had, raising doubts about the stability of the currency. The demand for gold was so high that the United States President Richard Nixon was forced to take action. His following plan was called the Nixon Shock.
Right here, family, the dollar is slipping. We just didn't know it at the time. If you can look back to the 70s, that's when the dollar started slipping in terms of losing its purchasing power, in terms of them printing a lot more dollars than the gold reserve that they have. Just like I mentioned a minute ago, can you really trust what they say in terms of having the amount of gold that they say they have? So having the dollar pegged to gold when you don't know how much gold is in their coffers. And then you also have to look at how much money they started printing. They're printing money out of thin air. And the more money that you print, the further and further the dollar goes down in value. So why would we, as a people looking to regroup ourselves and create an economic power base so that we can start to make products that we buy, and then we can also start to create businesses that employ people that look like us, and also raise those businesses to where they operate and challenge products on a global scale? If we're looking at doing that, why would we consider taking on this dollar, considering the current state of affairs with this dollar? So these are why we need to ask these questions and have these conversations. Absolutely, land is definitely something that we need to have. We know what we should be talking about that in large order. because land is something that we can utilize and make productive. But just having land and not understanding that a 14th Amendment citizen can't own land in a certain status lets us know that there's some really important changes that we need to make that have nothing to do with their money and their currency at all. We need to break the power dynamic, and the way we break the power dynamic is to get our debt that is owed to us paid to us in things that have intrinsic value. And we'll continue on with that further, family.
Investment.
The third indispensable element in building the new prosperity is closely related to creating new jobs and halting inflation. We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. In the past 7 years, there's been an average of one international monetary crisis every year. Now, who gains from these crises? Not the working man, not the investor, not the real producers of wealth. The gainers are the international money speculators. Because they thrive on crises, they help to create them. In recent weeks, the speculators have been waging an all-out war on the American dollar. The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world. Accordingly, I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. Now, what is this action, which is very technical, what does it mean for you? Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. If you want to buy a foreign car or take a trip abroad, market conditions may cause your dollar to buy slightly less. But if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar. Now, this action will not win us any friends among the international money traders. But our primary concern is with the American workers and with fair competition around the world. To our friends abroad, including the many responsible members of the international banking community who are dedicated to stability in the flow of trade, I give this assurance. The United States has always been and will continue to be a forward-looking and trustworthy trading partner. In full cooperation with the International Monetary Fund and those who trade with us, we will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system. Stability and equal treatment is in everybody's best interest. I am determined that the American dollar must never again be a hostage in the hands of international speculators. I'm taking one further step to protect the dollar, to improve our balance of payments, and to increase jobs for Americans. As a temporary measure, I am today imposing an additional tax of 10% on goods imported into the United States. This is a better solution for international trade than direct controls on the amount of imports. This import tax is a temporary action. It isn't directed against any other country. It's an action to make certain that American products will not be at a disadvantage because of unfair exchange rates. When the unfair treatment is ended, the import tax will end as well. As a result of these actions, the product of American labor will be more competitive, and the unfair edge that some of our foreign competition has will be removed. This is a major reason why our trade balance has eroded over the past 15 years.
Looking at this white supremacist talk and listening to what he has to say basically shows you how not only will they lie to the melanated people of the world to dominate and control them, but he will also lie to his fellow man. everything he said was basically a total lie. If you look at where they went from this online interview, on-air interview, to now, is what they went further into printing fake money, using loans in these dollars as debt notes to countries that are poor and impoverished based upon their country's policies and laws towards these melanated countries, and getting them to sign loans that bring these debt notes and this debt system into the homelands of melanated people. So why would we be willing to accept this same form of payment that is causing the rest of the world to be enslaved, to cause Africans who are waking up in the one of the richest continents in the world with minerals untold and natural resources and precious metals untold underneath their feet, and they're waking up in shanty towns and huts and things of that nature? It's because of this monetary system in the monetary world order. And asking for things within this world order is not going to benefit melanated people throughout the diaspora, and nor is it going to benefit the indigenous Black Americans here in our country here. It's not going to benefit us. The things that will benefit us will be precious metals, owning the land and owning it with a alloidial title, making sure that our status isn't a status where they can compel performance and act on us, in a way to where, I've seen one white police officer pull a brother away from 50 brothers. How is that possible? So this power dynamic, we need to be talking about how we can break that power dynamic when it comes to reparations, not how we can have monetary investment, even though I know there's brothers and sisters who will take that money and flip it, and make it happen. And I don't doubt that. But when we understand what 14th Amendment citizens can do and what they can't do, a lot of people would change their minds about trying to receive anything in that status. So, let's definitely talk about that. But this money, asking for money, give me some of your money so that we can further continue to participate in this debt scheme and this slavery scheme. We definitely have to look at that over and over again, especially when you look at what is happening in terms of a new horizon with the BRICS nation. And we're going to get into that now, family.
Payment security. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa under the BRICS umbrella will launch a new global reserve currency. It is not Bitcoin, but a type of digital currency known as CBDC that is expected to replace the US dollar. The BRICS countries have joined forces to challenge the US dollar as the new global reserve currency, with the goal of developing the CBDC digital currency. A great reserve currency combines safety, liquidity, and return, which is why the BRICS may consider using gold. The Chinese RMB yuan, the Russian ruble, the Indian rupee, the Brazilian real, and the South African rand will form the basis of the new BRICS currency, which will be based on a basket of the currencies in the 5 member countries. By 2050, it is anticipated that these same nations will be the primary suppliers of manufactured goods, services, and raw materials. These 5 countries account for 42% of the global population, 3.2 billion people. 30% of the world's landmass, 23% of its population, and 18% of its trade. Additionally, a sizable portion of the world's resources are produced by these 5 countries: 26% oil, 40% corn, and 46% wheat. Maz has said during a discussion about growing BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that the possibility and prospects of setting up a common single currency based on a basket of currencies of the BRICS countries is being discussed, adding that member states are actively studying mechanisms to exchange financial information to develop a trustworthy substitute for international payments. The BRICS countries previously announced that they were working to create a cooperative payment network in order to reduce their reliance on the Western financial system. Additionally, the member nations have been using more local currencies in their bilateral trade. The Russian ruble has had the best year of any currency in the world this year, increasing in value by an average of over 30% despite sanctions.
When the BRICS first got together in 2000, 2009, that was at a time of global financial turmoil, especially in the West, starting from the Lehman Brothers collapse in the United States.
But the BRIC countries, especially China and India, recovered from the crisis relatively unscathed, something that gave the group momentum. It wasn't until the commodity crunch of 2013 that the wind was taken out of the bloc's sails. Brazil and Russia's oil-dependent economies began to shrink, and investors started to write off the once so promising grouping. But even though BRICS was no longer front of mind for the West, the countries continued to meet. Charles Onanaiju is the director of the Center for China Studies, a think tank focused on promoting cooperation between China and Africa.
BRICS represent a framework of new opportunity to engage issues that are very critical to global governance.
This focus on global affairs has drawn comparisons to the G7. The G7 stands for Group of Seven and consists of the world's most influential and advanced economies: Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. While the group represents about 44% of the world's GDP, the countries only make up 10% of the world population. And then there's the New Development Bank. The NDB was set up by the BRICS countries in 2015 to support infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emerging or developing countries. Since its inception, the Shanghai-headquartered lender claims to have funded almost $32 billion in projects ranging from clean energy, urban mobility, transport to digital infrastructure.
Larger emerging economies which are part of these other groupings, and what China I think ideally would like would be to have a substantial grouping of emerging and developing economies that would act as a counterweight to those international bodies that have the United States and its allies at their heart.
Since 2013, non-BRICS countries have been invited to attend the annual summit, and China proposed a BRICS Plus framework in 2017. Other countries that have expressed interest in joining an expanded BRICS Plus framework include Nigeria, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kazakhstan, and Thailand.
To my brothers and sisters over here in the Americas, if you listen closely to what they just said, when they're talking about these BRIC nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, they're saying that by 2050, that they're going to have all these numbers, that they're going to be the primary providers of services and raw material and trade to the world. And not once are they mentioning Black Americans over here in America. They don't think that we're going to do anything, that we don't have anything as a people to show an economic base to where we have industries and things moving forward and that are competing on the global stage. They're not even considering us and taking us into the picture. So we as a people over here, Indigenous Black Americans, need to get busy and get serious about creating an economic power base so we can stand on the world stage. We have too many of us thinking from a standpoint of being merged into this United Statesism. No. We know that they are an occupying force, that this is still our land, and we are the ancient people of the land. So we need to reestablish ourselves to where we are the primary providers, or at least one of, when it comes to services, raw materials, and trade throughout the world. We're not even being spoken of, family, and we have to change that immediately. This is why I say we need to have the conversation when it comes to reparations about what we should be asking for. Always, when it comes to real serious conversations such as these, they always have people speaking for the Black community or Black people who do not represent us. Another thing I wanted to mention on the way out the door is listen to what they said about the G7. They said the G7 is influential in advanced nations, France, basically all European countries. So you see that they set up a world order, especially a money world order, to where they are going to dominate. And these are your money changers that they're talking about in the scripture, those who changed the money when Jesus overturned the table of the money changers. These are your money changers. And they're utilizing or turning what was money into debt notes, which dominate the world. So what we should take away from this is that, man, we're not really even being spoken of on the world stage. We're not even being looked at as producers of good, manufacturer of fine automobiles, manufacturers of tablets and phones. We're not even being looked at when it comes to those things on the world stage, Black Americans, and we need to get it together. So we need to be asking for land, resources that will enable us to build industries, enable us to act as a nation, and therefore we can register ourselves amongst the independent nations of the world so that we can compete for ourselves. Because if we continue in this manner, it's not going to work. So when it comes to reparations, we definitely need to be asking for the right things. What do you say, family? I ask that you give me your comments below. Please like, subscribe to the channel, and please, I'm definitely wanting to hear your opinion. Let your voice be heard, but we have to be very careful when we accept something for atrocities committed against us, because they can give you nothing and then treat you like they don't gave you something. Okay, family, until the next video, peace.
You do see